It was a quiet suburban street, the kind where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. But that changed when the flashing blue lights of a police car illuminated the road, pulling over a sleek black SUV. Inside the vehicle sat none other than Dwayne The Rock Johnson, his brow furrowed in confusion as he slowed to a stop. He hadn't been speeding, so what was this about? Moments later, an officer approached with a harsh demeanor, setting off a chain of events that would teach everyone involved an unforgettable lesson. The Rock rolled down his window as the officer approached, his stern expression giving away no clue as to why he'd been pulled over. "Evening, officer," Dwayne said politely, his deep voice calm and steady. "Is there a problem?" The officer, a tall man with a sharp jawline and an air of arrogance, leaned down, shining his flashlight into the SUV. "License and registration," he barked, ignoring Dwayne's question. Dwayne raised an eyebrow but complied without argument, handing over the requested documents. "Mind if I ask why I've been stopped?" he repeated, keeping his tone measured. The officer smirked, flipping through the paperwork with deliberate slowness. "Routine check," he said dismissively. "You look like you might be up to something." "Up to something?" Dwayne repeated, his confusion shifting to irritation. "I'm on my way home from the gym, that's all." The officer's smirk widened. "Sure you are," he said sarcastically. "Funny how guys like you always have a story." The implication in the officer's tone didn't go unnoticed. Dwayne's jaw tightened, but he held back, knowing the situation could escalate if he reacted the wrong way. "Guys like me?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. "What's that supposed to mean?" The officer straightened, clearly relishing the power he thought he held in the situation. "You know what it means," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Stay here while I run your info." As the officer walked back to his car, Dwayne took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He had dealt with moments like this before, but it didn't make it any easier. He glanced in his rearview mirror, watching the officer make a show of typing something into his computer, his smug expression visible even from a distance. The Rock knew this wasn't about a routine stop. It was about something deeper, something unjust, and he wasn't going to let it slide. Minutes passed, and the officer remained in his patrol car, occasionally glancing up at Dwayne's SUV with a look of suspicion. Dwayne sat patiently, though his patience was wearing thin. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been in similar circumstances. Finally, the officer returned, holding Dwayne's license and registration in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Dwayne's brow furrowed. "Why?" he asked, his calm demeanor giving way to frustration. "I haven't done anything wrong." The officer tapped his flashlight against the SUV's door. "I said step out," he repeated, his voice louder and more aggressive. Reluctantly, Dwayne opened the door and stepped out, towering over the officer. His imposing presence seemed to unnerve the man, but only for a moment. The officer quickly regained his composure, gesturing for Dwayne to stand near the hood of the car. "Hands where I can see them," the officer barked. Dwayne complied, though his expression was now a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "This is unnecessary," he said. "What exactly are you looking for?" The officer smirked again, clearly enjoying the power dynamic. "You tell me," he said. "People like you tend to have interesting things in their cars." The thinly veiled racism in the officer's words hung in the air like a bad stench. Dwayne's fists clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I've got nothing to hide," he said, "but you're crossing a line." The officer ignored him, walking around the SUV and peering into the windows. He gestured to another officer who had arrived on the scene, and together they began searching the vehicle without permission. As Dwayne stood by, his frustration boiled over. He wasn't going to let this go unanswered, but he knew he had to handle it the right way. He watched as the officers rifled through his belongings, finding nothing but gym gear and a water bottle. The first officer turned back to him, his smirk fading. "Lucky for you, everything checks out," he said begrudgingly, as if disappointed he couldn't find anything incriminating. Dwayne took a deep breath, his voice steady but sharp. "Lucky for me, or lucky for you?" The officer froze, his arrogance faltering for the first time. Dwayne's words carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. The tension in the air was palpable as Dwayne held the officer's gaze. The other officer shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the situation was slipping out of their control. The first officer, however, wasn't ready to back down. "Careful with your tone," the officer said, his voice losing some of its edge but still attempting to assert dominance. "You don't want to make things worse for yourself." Dwayne straightened, his towering frame casting a shadow over the officer. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. "Worse for myself? Let's be clear about something. I've been polite and compliant, even when you've treated me with disrespect, but I won't tolerate being profiled." The officer's jaw tightened, and his eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape from the mounting pressure. Other drivers had begun to slow down as they passed the scene, some pulling out their phones to record. The situation was no longer as private as the officer had hoped. "You think this is profiling?" the officer scoffed, though his confidence was clearly waning. "I'm just doing my job." Dwayne took a step closer, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass people based on how they look or what you assume about them. I've done nothing wrong, and you know it." The officer glanced at his partner, who looked increasingly uneasy. The presence of onlookers and the quiet authority in Dwayne's voice were making it impossible for them to justify their actions. "This could have gone differently," Dwayne continued, his tone unwavering. "You could have treated me with respect from the start, but instead, you chose to abuse your authority, and now everyone watching knows it." The officer's face reddened, but he said nothing. The silence spoke volumes. The quiet tension on the street was broken by the hum of car engines slowing down, as more and more drivers began pulling over to watch the unfolding scene. Phones were out, recording every word, every movement. The officer's confidence, once so unshakable, began to falter under the weight of the growing attention. Dwayne noticed the shift, but he kept his focus. "You see," he said, his voice calm but deliberate, "when people in positions of power misuse it, they lose trust. And trust isn't something you can just take back. It's earned." The officer's partner finally spoke up, his voice quieter than before. "Maybe we should wrap this up," he said, glancing nervously at the onlookers. But the first officer wasn't ready to concede. "You think giving a speech is going to change anything?" he snapped at Dwayne. "You don't know what it's like to deal with this job every day." Dwayne tilted his head slightly, his expression unflinching. "And you don't know what it's like to be judged before you even open your mouth," he replied. "But here's the thing, we can do better. All of us." The bystanders murmured in agreement, their support adding weight to Dwayne's words. A woman from the crowd stepped forward, her phone still recording. "He's right," she said. "You shouldn't have pulled him over without cause. We've all seen enough of this." The officer's face flushed as he realized he was no longer in control of the situation. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was clear that the public was on Dwayne's side. The first officer hesitated, his arrogance faltering under the weight of the crowd's eyes and the mounting tension. The murmurs from the onlookers grew louder, their collective presence becoming a silent demand for accountability. Dwayne stepped forward slightly, his towering frame making the officer take a small step back. "You have a choice right now," Dwayne said, his voice calm but firm. "You can keep digging yourself into a deeper hole, or you can take responsibility for how you've handled this." The officer's partner shifted uncomfortably, finally stepping in. "Maybe we should let this go," he said, his voice low but clear. "There's nothing here to justify holding him any longer." The first officer turned sharply to his partner, his face a mix of frustration and embarrassment. "Are you seriously taking his side?" "I'm not taking sides," the partner replied. "I'm saying there's nothing to gain from this. We've done enough." Dwayne watched the exchange with quiet intensity. He could see the cracks in the officer's resolve, but he wasn't going to let this moment pass without making an impact. "Let me make this easy for you," Dwayne said, addressing both officers now. "You've made a mistake. Own it, apologize, and let this be a lesson, not just for you, but for everyone watching." The crowd murmured in agreement, a few voices calling out, "He's right," and "Do the right thing." The growing pressure was impossible to ignore. Finally, the first officer sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Fine," he muttered, "you're free to go." But Dwayne wasn't finished. "That's not enough," he said, crossing his arms. "You owe me an apology." The officer's jaw tightened, his pride warring with the undeniable truth of the situation. After a long pause, he muttered, "I'm sorry." Dwayne nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you. Now, let's hope this never happens again." to me or anyone else." With the tension broken, the crowd's murmurs turned to applause, their approval of Dwayne's calm but firm handling of the situation rippling through the gathered onlookers. The first officer stepped back, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved, while his partner avoided eye contact, clearly eager to leave. Dwayne turned to the crowd, raising a hand to quiet them. "Thank you for being here," he said, his deep voice steady but resonating with emotion. "Moments like this are difficult, but they're also important. It's up to all of us to make sure we hold each other accountable, not just for what's wrong, but for what's right." A woman in the front row of onlookers called out, "You handled that with so much grace. Thank you for standing up." Dwayne smiled faintly. "I don't need thanks. What I did today is what anyone should do when they see something that's not okay. Silence doesn't change anything. Action does." The crowd nodded, some murmuring in agreement. A few people stepped forward, offering words of encouragement and even a handshake. "You've inspired us, man," one young man said, his phone still recording. "This is the kind of leadership we need." Dwayne glanced back at the officers, who were now retreating to their car. He turned back to the crowd, his expression softening. "It's easy to get angry in moments like this. I've felt that anger. But it's not about tearing people down. It's about building something better. For all of us." The applause grew louder, and Dwayne gave a small nod before stepping back toward his SUV. The moment had shifted from confrontation to inspiration, and he could feel the weight of what had just happened. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had witnessed it. The incident might have ended there, but the power of the internet had other plans. By the next day, videos of Dwayne's calm confrontation with the officer were trending on social media. Captions like, "The Rock teaches a powerful lesson," and "Grace in the face of injustice" accompanied the clips, which were shared thousands of times within hours. News outlets quickly picked up the story, praising Dwayne's composure and the way he had handled the situation. Headlines like, "Dwayne Johnson stands up against profiling in viral video," and "The Rock turns tense police encounter into a teachable moment," dominated news feeds. Dwayne, ever humble, addressed the attention in a brief social media post. Alongside his still from the video, he wrote, "Yesterday was a reminder that we all have a role to play in standing up for what's right. This isn't about me, it's about holding ourselves and each other accountable. Let's choose kindness, respect, and understanding every day. What goes around, comes around." The post garnered millions of likes and comments, with people from around the world sharing their own experiences and thanking Dwayne for his leadership. One comment read, "This is why we love you, Rock. You're not just a hero on screen, you're one in real life too." But it wasn't just fans and supporters who took notice. Advocacy groups reached out to Dwayne, asking if they could collaborate with him to raise awareness about systemic issues and promote solutions. Dwayne, always eager to give back, agreed, using the viral moment as a springboard to bring attention to the need for fairness and accountability. As the viral moment continued to spread, Dwayne didn't let it stop at conversation. He turned it into action. Partnering with several advocacy organizations, he began working on initiatives to promote fair policing practices and community engagement programs. His message was clear. Change wasn't just about calling out injustice, but about creating solutions that fostered trust and understanding. One such initiative was a campaign called Bridging the Gap, which brought law enforcement officers and community members together for open dialogues. Dwayne participated in the first event, where he shared his story and encouraged others to speak honestly about their experiences. At the event, Dwayne stood in front of a packed auditorium. "This isn't about finger-pointing," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "It's about listening, understanding, and finding common ground. We all want safer communities. The only way to get there is by working together." The room erupted in applause as attendees shared their own stories of injustice and healing. Officers in the audience listened intently, many of them later approaching Dwayne to express their gratitude for the opportunity to bridge the divide. One officer, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, approached Dwayne after the event. "I've been in this job for 20 years, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "And I'll admit, I've made mistakes, but hearing you speak tonight, it reminded me why I started this job in the first place. To protect, not to judge." Dwayne shook his hand firmly. "It's never too late to do better," he said. "What matters is that you're willing to try." The campaign gained traction, with more cities adopting similar programs. Videos of Dwayne's involvement in the initiative spread online, further solidifying his role as a leader not just in entertainment, but in advocacy. As Bridging the Gap gained momentum, the movement began to expand far beyond the initial events. Communities across the country started hosting their own dialogues, inspired by Dwayne's message of unity and accountability. Social media flooded with hashtags like Jai Stand Up Together and Yair Bridging the Gap, with people sharing stories of how the campaign had brought positive change to their neighborhoods. Dwayne continued to lead by example, using his platform to highlight the stories of everyday heroes, officers who had gone above and beyond for their communities, activists working tirelessly for justice, and people who had chosen compassion in moments of tension. One such story involved a young man who had seen the viral video of Dwayne's confrontation with the officer. "That video changed my life," he wrote in an emotional post that gained traction online. "I used to stay quiet when I saw injustice because I thought it wasn't my place to get involved. But now I know better. I've started volunteering at local events and helping my community because of what I saw him do." Dwayne shared the post with a heartfelt response. "It's moments like this that show how powerful we all are when we choose to stand up for each other. Keep doing what you're doing. You're making a difference." The movement also caught the attention of policymakers and leaders, some of whom reached out to Dwayne for input on how to implement systemic changes. While humbled by the attention, Dwayne made it clear that the movement wasn't about him. It was about creating a better future for everyone. "This isn't about being a celebrity," he said during a televised interview. "It's about being a human. It's about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to make the world better, not just for ourselves, but for the people who come after us." Months after the initial incident, Bridging the Gap had evolved into a nationwide movement, with thousands of participants and countless stories of progress. Community programs, new training initiatives for law enforcement, and public outreach events were reshaping the way people viewed justice and fairness. What had begun as a single moment on a suburban street was now changing lives across the country. Dwayne, though humble about his role, remained at the heart of it all. He continued to show up, not as a celebrity, but as a citizen determined to make a difference. Whether he was sitting in on community meetings or sharing personal stories at large events, his presence reminded people that everyone had the power to stand up for what was right. One evening, Dwayne attended an event honoring the success of Bridging the Gap. The room was filled with people who had been impacted by the movement, officers who had changed their approach to policing, individuals who had found their voice, and families who felt safer and more valued in their communities. As Dwayne stepped onto the stage to give a speech, the audience erupted into applause. He waited for the room to quiet before speaking, his deep voice resonating with sincerity. "I didn't start this movement," he said. "You did. Every single person in this room, and everyone out there who's chosen to stand up against injustice. You're the reason we're here. This is your legacy." The applause was thunderous, but Dwayne wasn't finished. "What happened to me that day wasn't unique. It happens to too many people, too often. But what we've shown is that change is possible when we come together. This isn't about pointing fingers or tearing each other down. It's about building something better. And together, we've started something that I hope will last for generations." The crowd rose to their feet, the energy in the room electric. Dwayne stepped back from the podium, his heart full as he looked out at the sea of faces. He knew the journey wasn't over, but the progress they had made was undeniable. Later that night, as Dwayne sat quietly reflecting on everything that had happened, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The moment on that street could have been just another ugly encounter, but it had become something far greater, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, people could choose to be better, to do better, and to inspire others to do the same. This story shows us that standing up for what's right can lead to powerful, lasting change. Have you ever witnessed or been part of a moment that sparked something bigger? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring tales.